Sadhya Gaon's discussion of Tameh HaMitzvot in the third treatise of his Book of Beliefs and Opinions was the first systematic philosophic discussion in this area. He was the first to explicitly identify a category of so-called mitzvot sichliot, or rational commandments, the reasons for which are accessible to human reason. Now, given his kalam approach, Sadhya begins with the fact that all the commandments were revealed miraculously by the prophets from God, but then he says that subsequently we find that some of them also have reasons. So how does Sadhya characterize these reasons? Well, he seems to set up 4 principles of reason into which all of the commandments fall. I've numbered them for you here in the excerpt from his discussion, and you'll see that the first is simply to do with thanking or compensating someone who does something good for you. Logic demands, as he puts it, whoever does something good be compensated, either by means of a favor shown to him if he is in need of it, or by means of thanks. The second is simply that wise people do not permit themselves to be treated with contempt or to be insulted. The third is the straightforward rationality of preventing human beings from harming each other. Creatures should be prevented from wronging each other, as he puts it. And the fourth concerns the wisdom of employing individuals to perform certain tasks and then compensating them for doing so, which is obviously good for the employee who gets paid and for the employer who keeps his employees loyal. So, as he puts it, reason deems it proper for a wise man to give employment to an individual who performs a certain function and to pay him a wage for it. Now, the first thing to notice here is that these demands hardly seem to be demands of straightforward reason, certainly not of logic. There's nothing illogical about not paying your employees, for example. It's certainly not very nice, but it isn't an offense against logic. And the same goes for all of the principles that he lists. So when Sadhya talks about commandments being rational, his idea of the rational is actually quite broad. Some might say quite weak. The principles seem like common sense principles. Many of us would quite likely subscribe to them. But they're hardly principles the denial of which would be in some way irrational. So Sadhya therefore has quite a generous definition of what's rational, and some scholars have actually questioned that, as we'll see later on. Nonetheless, he does go on to show that many mitzvot fall under the first 3 principles, and it's only these that he terms rational commandments. These are mitzvot that he thinks are implanted in our minds. We naturally find them to be rational, and they fall under principles 1 through 3. But those that fall under the 4th principle about an employee and his employer, they fall into a different category, the category of mitzvot shimiot, or revealed commandments. Now these, in contrast to the category of rational commandments, he tells us, these ones neither the approval nor the disapproval of which is decreed by reason on account of their own character. These commandments, he tells us, from the standpoint of reason, are optional. Now what does this mean? These revealed commandments do fall under the 4th principle of giving employment to an individual who performs a certain function. Point is, it's rational for us to do these mitzvot since God has commanded them, and we will get rewarded as our payment for doing them. But the point of distinguishing the mitzvot falling under this 4th principle from those that fall under the other 3 is that these ones are not rational on account of their own character. If you look at the commandment not to murder, for example, you'd immediately see that it's sensible just by looking at the law itself. You don't think the only reason to do it is because God has told you to. It's just a sensible law. But looking at the dietary laws, for example, the laws of kashrut, there's no way we would come up with those laws through our own reason. We can't just look at them and immediately see, yes, that's perfectly rational. The only reason it's sensible to do them is because God told us to and will reward us. So this seems to be Sadhya's key distinction. Rational mitzvot can be understood as reasonable in themselves. Revealed mitzvot cannot. In what follows, though, we're going to look a little more closely at the actual reasons that he gives.